Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today on this call to listen to
No problem.
Professor. Hello, can we hear me?
Yes, Prof, we
Hello.
can hear you.
Thank you very much for. So I was saying good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you're joining us from today on this call. I'm happy to have every one of us, all the distinguished guests, our colleagues, professors, scholars, researchers, join us today to listen to our own very distinguished Professor Morenike Oluwatoyin Folayan Upong. She's a distinguished scholar, a researcher, she's an advocate, um, and has worked tirelessly as a professor of pediatric dentistry at Obafemi Awolowo University. I tell you that beyond her primary field of expertise, she has expanded her academic and advocacy portfolio to include adolescent sexual and reproductive health rights. She has worked with the vulnerable population of people living with HIV/AIDS in Nigeria. Professor Morenike Upong has done extensive research on ethical consideration in the design and implementation of clinical trials during the Ebola emergency in West Africa. So she's not just a scholar of Nigeria, she's a scholar in West Africa, in Africa, and across the globe. Our work has provided critical insight into ethical complexity of conducting researches with clinical trials, establishing standards that can be used to address urgent public health concerns. She's a leader that's with evidence, landmarks, and different leadership style. And this was evident during her tenure, just completed tenure as the executive director of the Central Office of Research at Obafemi Awolowo University. And there she played a pivotal role in strengthening the institution's research infrastructure. She fostered lots of collaborations, and then she promoted excellence in scholarly pursuits. She was recently awarded or inducted into the Nigerian Academy of Science. Please, if you have not listened to Professor Morenike Upong before, I'll plead with you, I'll psych you to sit back and listen attentively. Don't just listen jokingly or playfully, but listen attentively, because today, this afternoon, we are going to be drawing from our wealth of wisdom as she looks through this title, Gender Inequalities in the Academia, the Role of Young Researchers. Join me to warmly welcome Professor Morenike Folayan.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. It was nice listening to you, citing me. It tickled my fancy. Thank you so much. Your words are truly kind. I also want to congratulate the Center Office of Research actually hosting this topic at this time. I think it continues to be topical when we're talking about gender inequalities. We're also seeing differences in the field, but we're not where we want to be. What I'm going to share with you today was a result of my research into the field. And you ask me, what am I doing here again? She's jumping from dentistry to bioethics. She has jumped to gender again. But then as researchers, I think our acumen is to be able to solve problems wherever the problem might be, in whatever form and shape that they show up. But I'll share with you briefly why I'm here in this space. I work in the academia. I love academia. Whatever I do, I find my way back here. And the evidence shows that there's inequity in terms of gender distribution in the academic staff, be it academic and non-academic staff. In the country where it is clear that there are more females than male, but in the establishment and in the workspace, there's more men than women. So therefore, we truly have inequity when we're talking about this, and it's something to discuss. So we find that in the academic space, we have about 51,000 academic staff who are male, and almost a third of them and just about a third of that number are females. And even when you look at the non-academic space, half of the non-academic staff that are females, whereas the majority are males. So there's disparity, and this disparity is not just in the academic space as a whole, but also in the medical and dental academic space. And you'll see me come down to this. Within that space, women in the health research actually face disproportionate challenges. I was on a call about last week or 2 weeks ago, organized by Age, brilliantly spoken to by Professor Babalola. Very brilliant piece of engagement that she had. If you were not at that talk, I encourage you to have access to the recordings. I think it's publicly accessible to understand these issues. And I hope as I go through this, I'll raise why these issues become very important. You can't tackle this issue of inequality, and this is what I found in my piece of work, without understanding the fundamentals. It is not just a male and woman thing. It is far beyond male and woman thing. If you want to do it, it has to be an active process. I repeat, it's an active process. It cannot happen passively. It can't even happen by just increasing the number of females going to secondary schools. It is very important to do that. And it is not about the gender against the other. It isn't. It's because there is the essentials that are brought to the table when both or all the genders, as I would want to speak at this time, acknowledging that there's more than binary gender in this field. It's very important to bring us all to the table. So, okay, why did I get here? Dr. Oni is scribbling. Please help us to help him not to scribble. I got into this space because, like I said, I do well in the medical space, but something triggered my interest. I was at a meeting in South Africa, the COP meeting. There's a COP meeting that happens everywhere where PEPFAR thinks through with its partners on how to use its funds. At this meeting, the UNAIDS country director from Nigeria was extremely impressed with my talk. Not my talk, there wasn't any talk I gave. I was engaging over 3 days. He was extremely impressed, and I could see it. And because of that, he wanted me to take part in a UN project that was being organized. And then at the end of the day, in that space, I was given a core role. I wasn't given a lead role. I was given a core role, and I looked at who was the lead. I mean, I'm well advanced in terms of proficiency. And that, for the first time in my life, struck me that the only reason this happened was because I was a female. Not that it did not acknowledge my competency, but in a subconscious manner, a woman is always a sub. Ironically, I did not take that job. I just passed on, but he hit me. And since then, I just started noticing those subtle things, that despite the fact that you do have competency and it is acknowledged, it is walked over. Unlike if it was a male, it never would have been walked over. There's a consciousness. And it's not like they do, and these things are done deliberately to hurt. It's just that there's a unconscious building of the subjugative role of a woman that makes it less easy for you to make a woman lead without a little bit of fight to make it happen. And so I decided to do a PhD to explore my findings better. And I did multiple research to be able to do that. So my first phase of research was a West African study where we recruited 21 females and 9 males from Ghana, Senegal, Burkina Faso, and Nigeria, with ages ranging from 30 to 56, and all of them having a PhD or its equivalent. And what came out from that qualitative study very clearly was that traditional gender roles, which is basically housekeeping, actually decreases the research productivity of women. And when we talk about research productivity in academia, it's about scholarly production. Not only your publication, your collaboration, your being in those public spaces and the speaking engagement. And I just want you all to take a little moment to reflect. for every single one of you on the space. How many conferences or meetings do you go and you find the list of speakers and there's a female there? It's not as if they aren't female with competence, it just isn't a conscious effort. So you find that these gender roles affect their productivity. It keeps them away because they have to prioritize, they cannot renege. And they also noted that it's not because it can happen, there's gender insensitivity to female issues that affects them not only to get into this, address the issues of productivity, but also affects them working in those leadership roles. I'll give an example when we talk about religious sensitivity. For some reason, like in my own university, there is religious sensitivity in a way that we do not put exams on Friday at 2 o'clock or 1 o'clock because we recognize that religious people would have to go for their prayers on Friday. We would not do exams on Saturdays for in faculties where they are Jehovah's Witness. That is because there's a sensitivity. But without the gender sensitivity, you find us having meetings at 4 o'clock, like in my own university, without acknowledging that females have to do the home run, pick children at school. There aren't universities that consciously have creche, understanding that those in their most productive years are in their, the most productive academic years are also in their reproductive years and have to address childcare. So these are just snippets, not the whole scope. And please acknowledge here that when I'm talking about women, I don't mean gender roles is not just women. I'll show you some of the things I found that have to do with men. So this insensitivity actually affects their roles, and that empowering programs can also build the resilience of women to choose to take up those space. It's not as if they might not. They themselves also fall into the subjugate road and automatically say that, oh, this is what they must be. Without an active building of their roles, they won't even stand up to do what they actually find themselves to do. And women, despite the fact that they feel competent and of equal powers, they can't argue against the gender discrimination that is in the field. I'll tell you one of the very funny things I found in this space that I'd never found in the literature before. In this role, I think it was from women in Togo, recognizing that the homekeeping role decreased their productivity. You know what their recommendation was? Very much welcome, but I'm also highlighting this because we must be conscious that when we are making decisions about people, we must not appreciate their culture and be culture sensitive. You can't also be culture blind within this framework. You know what the women said? That as a solution, they would rather have their husband marry a second wife so that the second wife can take on the housekeeping role and allow them to take care of their career. Why did I raise this? I raised it for two things. One, despite the fact that we are, as women, recognize the hindering role that housekeeping or house chores bring, we are ready to relegate that role to another woman. Recognizing that relegating that role to another woman, even if she's a wife or not, is also going to hinder her own life and progress. There isn't the consciousness of that, rather than consciously addressing this and breaking women's free from this burdensome role. The second thing that also brought and made very strong for me is the fact that women recognize that they have to stay married to be able to move on in their career and leadership role. So it isn't an issue of wanting to be independent as a married person. It's about being in that married space, but getting an extra time and space to be able to do a lot more of their work. Because you have to be in that space, whether it's positive or negative, or you are abused or not abused, to have public respect to allow you to move forward successfully with your career. Those were two striking things that came from me from that piece of revelation. I'm hoping to write a little piece, a little case study around it, but for me, it was powerful. I then went on to another, I then moved from West Africa and then focused on the medical and dental academia in Nigeria. The West Africa work was just women in the academia in general, but now I'm now focused on the medical and dental people in Nigeria, trying to calm down and find more details. And I engaged 54 participants from 70 medical schools with their age ranging from 33 to 62. And their finding was that there were a limited number of medical trainees and dental trainees on the program. Ironically, in the 20th century, there were quite a number of women that were saying they were the first in their specialties. This is 21st century. Actually, I think we're actually in the 22nd century for all I know. They were the first woman in their specialty. I said, how can that still be a trophy in this time and age? And that gender inequality within the system was a reflection of what was happening in the country. It's not just academia itself or just medical or dental training programs. It's because there's a patriarchic value unconsciously moved from the environment, Nigeria as it is, into the academic system. And please recognize that the academia, many institutions were actually started by men. And so it is that value that laid the foundation, and is the value that is still sustained in our policies and our program and our systems and our structure. It is heavily dominated by that. A recognition of that will help us move away, do better when we're talking about policy reviews. And we noticed in that study that there were fewer research contributions from women. There was scarcity of women in the managerial role within the medical sector. I think that is very obvious. We do know that without me doing that research. And that, unfortunately, this low population of women in the spaces influenced knowledge production. I want to describe it by what I learned from Abimbola's pieces of work in terms of decolonization and bringing it home here when we say foreign gaze. When you have a result, you can only interpret the result by the knowledge you know, by what is real in your context. So when the majority of knowledge producers are from one gender, they would only reflect on the interpretation and recommendation of those findings based on their lens. We need a balance of gender. Please appreciate that when I talk about gender, I am very conscious that they are not binary. There are multiple genders in this space, and I acknowledge gender minorities. I acknowledge and I feel their voice should be heard. It takes all this gender being in that space to be able to interpret the results of any finding in a way that is meaningful and impactful for the lives of all persons. And now also started to see in the medical sector that women are starting to organize themselves to advocate for change. So you see the Medical Women Association, very powerful. They've changed times. They changed the time of maternity leave within the space. They allowed for longer times. They're doing things, but they have not latched on the academia, the research space, into the advocacy drive. In effect, when women organize themselves, they can make change, but they have to be a recognition of the change that they need to make for them to be able to make that powerful change. Could you help me to mute the video of Oluwadamilare Ogunoye, please? It's distracting. Yeah, please help me to mute the video. Thank you very much. And then I went on to do a deeper analysis of the qualitative findings that I had in the field. And this for me is the highlight of the talk that I'm giving today about the role of the younger people within the academia, the power of what they can do. Please give me a minute. I need to stop that video. Thank you. So what I found that was very profound for me, and what informed the title of the talk, was that there's a difference in age in terms of profiling of gender in academia. When you look at the younger age, these are people below the age of 50. I think that was the cutoff point. It's either 40 or 50, I think more like 40. There was a convergence of opinion, whether they were male or female. There was a convergence of opinion. They jointly agreed that there was gender inequality expressed in multiple ways in the medical and dental institutions. And male and female of this younger age felt that there was a need to do things to promote equal opportunities. They felt it was consensus. However, not only was there a divergence of opinion between male and females in the older generation, that divergence even reflected in their recommendation. So you found that some older men felt that there was gender inequality in the medical education sector. Some did not feel there was. The older women, as a voice, felt there was not gender inequality. As a voice, they felt no, there wasn't gender inequality, and that women just need to work harder, and make the advancements. There's no gender, and there's no need to do any gender segregation to improve the chances of female. No, it's about them working hard. Some males acknowledged there was gender inequality. However, their recommendation was based on gender stereotype that, women need to be supported to be able to do their own chores and the family care better, rather than improving their ability to do better at their career development. So this was something we found. Just to know that the papers I'm talking about, a number of them are published. The first one I discussed is published. The second one, this one I'm talking about, has been submitted for publication. We then went on to, it was 4 phases. So I'm bringing this 4th phase. This is the qualitative part, the quantitative part of my research. And then we did an analysis of what was happening in the dental sector in terms of research productivity. And we analyzed 1,222 publications by 413 individuals that were published between that year. And we found that women in the dental sector actually published more than the men. And please listen carefully as I go through this. This is one of the places where I found issues around gender highlighted. That females published more and were cited more than men. There wasn't within the field. When you think of first and last authors, you often think of last authors as mentors and first authors as junior mentees. There wasn't a correlation between the female as first author and last authors. Slightly more females were corresponding authors, but we found statistically significant difference, despite the fact that there were more females producing manuscripts and more females actually in the field. More men were involved in international and domestic collaborations. You hardly found women listed in international and domestic collaborations. It was men that we were finding there. And that more female dentists were in the academia due to gender. So that when trying to explain this, people said, it's because the dentistry is a lot more friendly to female. The working hours is a lot more friendly to females. And that's why it's, but we then explored what this might be deeper. So what we then did was invited 20 females to discuss all these findings in the last 3 studies, and that they can also explain this. These were senior women, past vice chancellors, past deans, past head of department, very senior women. We only got 8 of them to participate out of the 20 we invited. We can always appreciate that they're busy. What they, however, said was insightful. Very two basic things I think is insightful. Now, what you're saying in academia, where there's more female than males in the dental academia, it's not necessarily that females are doing well per se, but because of the gender role that makes a man have to be the breadwinner. And therefore, as a breadwinner, the salary in the dental sector in the public academic space cannot feed the family. And because there's better income for them as men, being in the private sector, they therefore go to the private sector. And that's the earnings in the private sector when you look at dentistry is almost over 1,000% what you earn as an academic. So what you're seeing is a drive out of the academia for male in the dental profession, because it is better to make income outside as an income earner and a breadwinner in the family. However, for those that are in the academia, they have to find ways of augmenting their incomes, and therefore they go into international collaborations to be able to get those extra resources. Does that not exclude women from international collaboration. There was an insight. This is one also insight from another woman that I heard, and I'd never heard it before. She talked about the fact that those international collaborations may be minimal for women because of the patriarchal roles in their family. They want their family to be sustained, and that many men in partnerships do not want women to be engaging with other men. And so they do not support or allow that collaborations to thrive, especially when those collaborations would not pull you into engaging in multiple spaces with men. I'm not saying this is representing everybody. Please note that this is qualitative research, but it was quite insightful for me. So you find that gender norms, we agree, limits women is regional collaboration, but this might be a dynamic. It might also be a gendered patriarchic action that is limiting this regional and international collaboration. But narratives are gradually changing. It isn't as bad as it used to be. Female high productivity, not likely driven by male mentorship. And this is one of the things we noted that, look, we have to improve. And I'm going to make a very strong case on this, that once there are a lot more male in the academic space, automatically female mentees will have to work with male mentors. Not that it is bad and not that it is less productive, but it is stronger and better for female mentors to work as female mentors. Please note that I did not study the male mentor-mentee relationship. So please, I don't have a objective voice to that. And I think it's something that might be studied. I can assume it will also be better. But we find out that female mentors, being a mentee, tends to be stronger. And flexible working hours are definitely needed. This is where the gender policy becomes very important, in a way that there's a policy and programs and institution that allows for flexibility of women. I remember a very dear friend of mine who talked about events in a university when many females cannot come to work when they're having their periods because the toilets can't support their ability to do their periods in school. So they stay at home. And male engagement in networking and partnership are gender-driven, and things must be done to change this paradigm. Let me take a little stop before I go to my next slide, which is about bringing me to the end of my discussion and opening up the space for further discussion. I really want to discuss this further. One of the things I learned very powerfully doing one of a talk with Professor Mushola, the current Vice Chancellor of the University of Lagos, talking about the dynamics between men and women, is that when women are called to many leadership spaces, they hesitate. Unlike men who take up a job, they say, this is like in Senate, what happens in our Senate, when there are those spaces, and then they're asking for a nomination. The men will put up their hands. They will get nominated. Then after they've gotten their nomination, they will now go and be asking, hey, this thing that they elected me for, what does it mean, Seth? What am I supposed to do? But they've gotten it. And in that space, they will grow. That is a man reflex. A woman, even when it's competent, you have to be convincing her that she can do the role. And we say, I can't do it. So you end up that even women that ought to occupy those spaces do not put themselves forward. To whose disadvantage? To the women folk. What is my advocacy here? That as women move up the ladder, please note, and this I am also reflecting on the topic, you wrong researchers, as you grow and move up the ladder, please note that as you move up the ladder, it's not about you, it's not just about yourself. You must recognize that you have a space to occupy as a female mentor to continue to create the space of equity and equality for women in the academia. So it's not enough for you to be an associate lecturer or a senior lecturer and then you congratulate and say A and say, oh, come and become HOD. And you then say, I'm not HOD. And I learned this once by watching Professor Omibodo, the provost, when she was provost. At my induction at the National Academy of Science, I saw a woman who stood on that podium who was extremely tired. I saw it. She was tired. And I could see her slides. It was a brilliant presentation, but I could see that she truly time. It was brilliant, I that, but I could see that, look, probably in the last minute, she was just putting slides together. But more importantly, what I saw was a woman that decided to fit for that meeting and take up that call to make that presentation, because she was a woman and she needed to stand up for a woman, for the women's folk, because it is a rare event to have a woman be told to give that kind of key speech. She could have said no, but she chose not to say no because it mattered for her to leave the footprint of women in that space. That day, I took up that decision, looking at her from where I sat, that I, Morenike, will play this role going forward. And that despite whatever it takes, I will fight to be in the space, not because I want to be in the space, but because I need to create the space for future women. Because mentorship by women for women make a difference. And I've done a few things. For example, when I look at the journals, I write on editors. Look, in your space that you have 34 authors, there's only one woman. How come? And then there's no African. How come? They always respond. So even as you grow up this ladder, you must speak up to make the change in that field. It will not happen passively. It has to be an active progress. The last piece of work I did, was that I reflected on everything using a theoretical lens, 4 theories. I used the 2008 USID Gender Equality Framework. I used the Ferguson theories. I used the academic literacy theories to look at career progression. Ferguson to look at the complexities in terms of the interplay of family dynamics on organizational factors. And then I used the 2008 USID Gender Equality to look at the multifaceted nature of gender disparities in the research and academic sector in West Africa. Finally, I also used the feminist institutional perspective to look at issues on societal inequality and how it affected gender equality enacted in the higher education sector. This was my final conceptual framework. I noted that all these gender plays can be divided into 3 main domains: societal factors, institutional factors, and individual factors, acknowledging that the societal factor makes patriotic issues, cultural norms, and religious values play a role within the academic sector. Even within the institute, there are organizational cultures that could otherwise be moderated. Hiring policy has to be sensitive, otherwise you find out that every time it will be males always dominating, not because males are not competent, but because from the primary to the secondary school, there's disparity in access of education, gender disparity. And it it's from primary school through to secondary school, but by tertiary institution, it is very prominent. Therefore, at the time of hiring, it is only going to be one gender that is at advantage. Without a conscious hiring policy to change that paradigm, it's not going to change. And then at the individual levels, like I noted, there's generation disparities in perspective, with the younger generation being at the forefront of actively possibly changing this. What does this mean? It means not to the exclusion of the older. We have to continuously teach and train and educate and engage the elders in workshops that highlight these issues, building their competency to be able to tear out these issues, but also investing heavily on the early career researchers who can change the future dynamics because they're already in that space and doing well, acknowledging that there's gender inequality in academia and that something needs to be done. But not only the generational differences, we also acknowledge the individual agencies need to be built, and in a way that it promotes collaboration for research, improves research productivity. And interventions, once again, has to be early, through advocacy and education, through reforms of institutional processes. And again, I highlight the need for gender transformative policies and guidelines in research institutions, and the need for development of gender-sensitive advocacies. This will all lead to strategic reforms that should otherwise promote gender equality, enhance institutional support for whichever gender they are, And of course, not forgetting the role of mentorship in the entire process. And so these are my recommendations. At the societal level, we need to incorporate gender-sensitive training into the primary and secondary educational curriculum. This gender disparity in numbers of people assessing medical and dental education or assessing higher education starts from the primary school. I'm unable to present the data here, but it shows by the time you get to the secondary school, by the time you get to tertiary institution, only 16% of females that have the competency to get into tertiary institutions enter the tertiary institutions. So you see disparity from the primary school. And I want to celebrate the groups. I think STEAM, the engineering women are doing very well in trying to promote this change. We have to engage community leaders to champion this. But it's not about changing cultural norms or religious norms, but those stereotypes that is to the disadvantage of a group of people we need to address. And we need to launch campaigns to encourage girls to participate in STEM field. It is not abnormal for a female to be an astronaut. It's changing, but we need to do a lot more. At the institutional level, like I noted, recruitment and promotion has to be done in a way that it allows for gender parity in the employment status. The norms, policies need to influence culture, organizational cultures, so that what we do is culture sensitive. I remember an action I took in Senate once, and I want to thank everybody in Senate that supported me. There was an election that happened, not as per norm, but it led to men being elected. And I stood up in Senate and I said, it cannot pass. We have to stop, because the university policy says that 25% of every office must have women. They said, let it go. I insisted. I continue to make laws. I said, we are not following the university regulation. This cannot pass. I want to thank every single man in that Senate that actually made it happen. And so that election process was overturned. In that Senate, we had to do it again. And in every single committee, a woman was then elected. Why is this important? When it comes to choosing vice chancellor, deputy vice chancellors in the future, your profile matters. When this profiles in terms of what you've been doing in terms of services to the university continues to elude women, you can't get to those spaces. So there must be a consciousness of I could only stand in that space and make that noise because there was a policy. And I made my pronouncement based on policy. And I'm really, once again, grateful, eternally grateful to members of Senate that chose to listen to that voice and asked for a redoing. And that way we were able to get one woman on every of those committees, which otherwise would not have happened. So these things matter. And of course, capacity building. There's a lot that we need to do in terms of providing leadership training for women at faculties, allocation of grants, consciousness to make these things happen. And at the individual level, mentorship matters. Mentorship. I am still surprised that in this days and era, even undergraduate students don't even know what mentorship is. There are too many people in this field that do not have mentors. You can only fly by standing on the shoulders of giants. You don't have to make the mistakes I've made. You must use my networks and my connection to move you faster than your peers. I've seen this happen when I got involved in a number of things in the US. That look, people fly, they get into those spaces because of their mentors. We must create those doors and those openings. And once again, I challenge every female senior person in the spaces. We must make your shoulders available for the junior ones to fly. Once again, the topic is here is about the place for those junior ones who already understand the need for gender equality actions, but they need platforms to be able to walk and fly in the space and make things happen so that they become the next generation of leaders that can make a difference in terms of policies and programs. We must encourage personal development, and we must recognize and reward faculty members that advocate for gender equality. A good way to go, and I would want to also ask that the Center for Gender Studies in all universities in the country, including mine and my director, Professor Ikundayo, that what we have to look for is gender equity task forces. I think at my university, if it has this, but we need to start with them to do a lot more so that they align the things we're doing in the university along with the National Gender Equality Framework, and at the same time secure international organizations and partnership with these organizations to fund and provide technical support to build our capacity to do this better. I would want to end by saying I recognize every single minority. I wrote gender twice, apologies. I recognize that this institution, there's gender minorities, there's sexual minorities, there's cultural minorities, there are minorities in terms of learning defects, and there are multiple other minorities. While today I am speaking about gender inequality, noting that women are treated as minorities and they can do better, I am also using this platform to advocate that there's a need to recognize these other minorities in whichever form they happen in this institution. And this space, I want to recognize Professor Baladale Makai, who's doing a lot in terms of studying around gender minorities and sexual minorities and what it means for the academia and what this means also for gender policies. There are gender minorities and sexual minorities among lecturers as well as among students, and we need to acknowledge their roles and do more to support them. On that note, I want to conclude that my study had underscored the need for multi-level intervention to be able to address gender inequalities in the academia in West Africa, with a special focus on Nigeria, and addressing the societal norms, institutional barriers, and individual challenges through targeted reforms. Academic institutions can then start to foster a more inclusive environment that promotes equal opportunities for all researchers. I have worked around academia because I recognize that academia itself is an illicit community that can influence and change countries, improve national development. And there is no doubt that academia influenced the change that we saw in Asia, China, Malaysia, Japan, Singapore. A majority of that change has started with academia. And therefore, if we don't do this change within this space that is illicit enough to drive national development and change the structure, and we might be making very little progress with national development. On that note, I want to say thank you for listening, and over to my facilitator. Thank you. Over.
Much. Thank you very much, Ma. We appreciate you for your presentation. It was indeed insightful. I promised everyone while introducing you that if anyone hasn't listened to you before, they should sit well and sit tight and be sure that it's going to be a very engaging and impactful time. And I tell you, I was blown away with this presentation, Ma. So thank you very much for this, Ma. I apologize that some of the chats that we had earlier had gone because my internet became unstable. So some of those chats, that beautiful insights and congratulatory messages that you sent in had been wiped off because of the internet. But please, if you want to react, have a conversation, feel free to raise your hands. Let's use our reactions, send some emojis, some love, some clapping, and then let's know that we have an active audience. I want to appreciate you once again, Ma, and I want to use this opportunity to appreciate the university management who empowered the Center for Gender and Social Policy Studies at Obafemi Awolowo University for the gender policy document and its development. I tell you and I promise you that we are already in a conversation with the management again to review those policies and then make them of international standard. They have been of international standard, but we can review and work on them, review and revise. Thank you very much, Ma, once again. Please, let's have reactions, questions. Let's keep it rolling. It was indeed a challenging conversation, a time to think through gender inequality in our academia, in our space, and think along how to make our lives better as men, as women in the academia. What do you think? We have fantastic delivery, great presentation. Thank you, my excellent presentation, quite thought-provoking. Thank you, Prof. Somebody said thank you so much, Ma.
I could take a question. I think it might could have wiped up. There's Laura that said, if it's okay with you, Ma, can I take that question?
Yes, please, Ma. Thank you very much.
So there's Laura that said, I love seeing women taking up space. However, older women who are more experienced tend to look down on younger women climbing up the career ladder. There needs to be space for mentorship. We are not competing against each other, but we should strive for. I think in my big project, I actually wrote about this, and I will challenge this perspective. These are, there are norms that people say that tends to pass down the years without people understanding. If there's anybody that supports women, do support women. The difference, if you would note, based on what I've said, is that older women assume you do not have the luxury of space, that you shouldn't have the luxury of space because you're a woman. You must strive like your male counterparts to be able to get into those spaces. Ironically, we don't strive like male counterparts to get into those spaces. We strive 2 to 3 times more than our male counterparts to get into those spaces. So no, I don't think women are hard. They seemingly are hard because they're challenging you to move faster. If there's a bad woman in quote, is the number is equal as bad men. It's not as if there's more bad man than any bad woman. But understanding the orientation from which we come from may help. Okay, so the older women are stronger drivers because they do understand that you cannot make a success with this level of ease. I remember I was in a medical women's meeting once, and they said, "Oh no, don't stress yourself." I said, you don't stress yourself. You don't make what kind of progress do you want to make? You must stress yourself. You are elastic. Don't stress your mental health. I support that. But that you just sit down and just don't stress yourself. You have to. You have to. Because you're instilled in a culture that requires you. But you're specially made. You can combine. It's about training yourself to be resilient and moving in those spaces. And women are not women's enemy. No, they are not. Yeah. Thank you very much. Over to you, Ma.
Thank you very much, Ma. I agree with you. Women are not women's enemy. We are striving and we are pulling each other up. We encourage people to, if you are a senior career researcher, professor, look for younger females that you can mentor so that they have the impression that you are not their enemy. If you cannot give back to your society, then you are not doing so well. You strive to do well. And when you're doing well, when you're thriving, remember those who are coming behind you that you can pull up. And like Prof said, you can give your shoulders to climb on. So it's important that we begin to see ourselves as partners in progress, not enemies that pull each other down. Thank you very much. We have lots of accolades and appreciation here, but I noted that someone said I'm deaf. I'm a deaf, so I have not been hearing except just reading. We will note that for subsequent presentations, and we'll find ways to make you learn from us. So we'll be more inclusive in our next presentation. Thank you for that. Aside that, do we have anyone who still wants to ask questions? Who feels, do we agree with all Prof has said is an academic presentation? She wants us to challenge her. Professor Morenica is not somebody to listen to, and she just wants you to say, thank you, Ma, thank you, Prof. She wants you to ask questions. She wants you to react. She wants you sometimes to disagree with her.
There are 2 hands up, actually. Yeah. Brenda and Wally. So, yeah.
All right, so please, you have the floor. I don't know, I can't have access to unmuting them, but if you can do that on your part, Ma, please help me unmute them so that they can ask their questions. Ma.
I can
somebody there.
I can unmute. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yeah.
Yes, please.
Okay, so maybe I go first, and then Brenda, and then Larry. So first of all, thank you so much. I thought it was a very insightful presentation. I actually came across the link to this webinar by chance, but I'm really glad that I was able to make it. So my name is Wale. I'm with WHO headquarters in Geneva, and I am the Men and HIV focal point. So as regards men, I saw that you mentioned, of course, women, but also men in your presentation. I wanted to get your insights about this sort of divisive conversation when it comes to gender. I think it's you might agree that each time we speak about men and women, it's more about a very divisive conversation where indeed, actually, in some quarters, you will find that it's about sometimes maybe suppressing men and bringing women up. Whereby, but for me, I think it's supposed to be, a conversation, a positive conversation that is collaborative and actually speaks about letting women rise and giving them the space for cohabitation. But maybe you can speak to that. The second thing is about the framework. So I saw that framework. I think it's a very good one, the one that has the individual, the societal. I'm not sure I got all the points on that slide. But my question is about the historical. Yes, that's it. The historical factors. I was reading a paper, sometime, which showed that a lot of our laws and policies, were actually, policies that came from history, from during the, colonial times and all of that. And I just wanted to know if there is actually a need to understand where we're coming from, why we have what we have, in order to be able to heal and to revise, our societies. Over.
Thank you very much. Those are two brilliant questions. Yes, I think one of the things you very well rightly noted is the seemingly men-women divide every time we're talking about gender, which also kind of creates tensions. And as much as possible, I try to not to reflect it, but it ends up at the same time always seemingly going there. I think there's no way you currently would study gender, especially within the African context, that is not skewed a lot more towards the women because the imbalance is to the disadvantage of the women. Not that that is where to go. If you do study gender in many other communities, for example, in the Norwegian community, it's very unlikely that it's going to be skewed to women, like I've highlighted it. It's because there is still that major imbalance in one direction. I think that is why, but I think this is something that should be studied, especially when we start to look at things around the cultural context. And that's why I highlighted those two cultural issues that makes me conscious that when we're thinking of solutions around and gender-related issues, the context must matter. I am sure women looking for a second wife for their husband to be able to do better with their career development will resonate better with an African community and will be a crime in another community. So yes, the men-women divide really sounds very strong now, but I am sure in the next decade, when you're studying the context of gender in Africa, that divide is still going to happen because there's more. Having said that, there must be a consciousness to start making the voice of the less heard now. Otherwise, if we're not, we must learn from history. I think this will enable me link with history, where a consciousness to empower the women will, at the end of the day, down the line, disempower the man. So if we are conscious of this history in the way we've seen it, there must be a consciousness to drive the empowerment of the men. And for you in WHO, I want to give a critical example that I talk about is like HPV. Now the donor drives HPV access and it is about women, girls. Whereas HPV access in other places is more gender. Why would we and our own leadership be accepting that HPV vaccines should be only for girls when it's profitable for both of them, So those are the kind of sensitivity I think we have an advantage of learning from what has happened in the past to prevent the unskewing. And then the second about the historical fact, believe me, when I learned from the history while doing this work, and I spent 4 years doing this piece of work, I was very sad. Our history was distorted with the colonialism. And one of the things you find me doing in multiple spaces is the decolonization agenda. Because without understanding our history, as you very rightly noted, our solutions would also be blinded and skewed because we would not appreciate how colonization has otherwise eroded, influenced so strongly our thinking and our recommendation of what is right, which is not truly representative of the majority in the country. So yes, it's a 1 hour presentation. There's a limited scope I could do, but I completely agree with you. Those historical contexts in shaping and defining the way we go forward is very important. But this is what I want to say. One of the things that continue to move is that for people that do policies and programs, especially within the academia, and that's why I make this an academia issue, people will invest and unearth the publications you put out there to define policies and programs, including you, WHO. If we as Africans are not ensuring that our voices are represented in those spaces, what will be unearthed with the voices of others? And then we talk about the foreign gaze. So it will influence our policy program formulation unfavorably if we do not empower our scholars to do the publication that is necessary to define and drive our policies and programs. So thank you for those excellent questions. And I'm not sure I gave answers, but rather did a lot more troubling than before. Over to you. There's still one more
Thank you
hand up.
very much. Thank you very much for the response. Yes, you did. You gave good response, and we enjoyed listening. We'll give the floor to Brenda. Brenda, please unmute and ask your question.
Hello, everyone. I wanted to put my video on, but it's saying only host can allow. I'm not sure
I think it's because of the bandwidth. Yes, it's because of the bandwidth that they put it up. So that's why mine is not on. So I could speak. Yes.
No worries. Thank you. So I think this is more of maybe a contribution or something we can think of as opposed to a question. And what you have talked about, particularly in this slide that we are looking at, I'm experiencing a lot of, I guess we could call them challenges in this field, particularly on implementation with policies to do with peace and security. And a lot of times we find that, yes, all these policies that as academia have talked about, researched and whatnot, but getting to the ground and implementing them, like you receive a lot of resistance. And this is mainly because even though we include academia in these fields, we don't usually work with them to their entirety. And this is particularly with regards to anthropology, whether medical, social, and cultural, because many at times we see that these policies that have been set are just being imposed. Like you need water, just take water, but we're not asking you how you want to take it, if it is warm, if you prefer it in a glass, and things like that. And so we end up getting a lot of resistance, more so because we do not like to work with them and see things in their eyes. And I would say this because this being the year of justice and reparations for AU, I'm a bit worried that this may fall into another theme because we're not willing to discuss, and not saying in the AU sector, but in the rooms themselves, in our homes and whatnot. We're not willing to discuss the main issue, which is identity. And I think you had discussed this because many a times, yes, it's great to include women in the sectors and whatnot. But when you're getting in the space where an actual woman is supposed to take over, you're now starting to see the resistance, be quiet. I think you need to consider this and whatnot. And I think we have seen that today with I think it is the Nigerian Parliament or Senate, where the lady is trying to speak up, and then other ladies are asking her, like, you need to pause and relax. Maybe it's not something you're supposed to say. So this is a contribution. I think the field, our main issue is the field, because if we're not able to handle these questions in the classrooms, in the homes and whatnot, then I fear this may be another topic to discuss again. Last but not least, thank you. I'm in the peace and security sector.
Thank you, Brenda. I think those are really excellent issues. Of course, peace and I think what we also see is that this influences peace and security. I think what I hear from you is about driving for action and less about talking. I'm sure, Brenda, we're going to be here again in 2026 saying these things. The only thing I've seen, however, I can say, at least in my lifetime, I've seen shifts I've seen shifts. But we must choose to make those shifts happen collectively and faster. And I'm very grateful for the Center for Gender Studies to giving me this platform. I felt, look, I could do this project and I leave it under my table. But creating the space and allowing me to speak means I've also been heard by 100 extra person. Of this extra 100 person, maybe 2, 3 might do something with it, but we're starting to move that shift. I think also for us within the African space is the slowness of translating a lot of these things into action because we do not have systems and structures to change them. If you are in higher income countries, when this kind of things happen and this kind of evidence evolve, there are mechanisms to immediately translate it from the top to the bottom, from academic left, right. We have developed very poor systems. And one of the poor systems I would address, Brenda, is even our conduct of research, which is poorly non-collaborative. For me to have done this work and left out the community in itself beyond involving them as just the research participant is also not the way to go. I should have ideally engaged them as community partners in the design and implementation. They would learn from it and take it for implementation, whether policy comes out or not. So it's that empowerment, even for we as researchers, to do things in ways that the people that are affected, that we're engaging, is engaging in the design of what we have to do. There's another way to learn, that we need to learn research. And if that kind of research should also be gender empowering. So I really thank you for raising this voice, Brenda. I think it's a lot more of challenging us to think outside the box so as to ensure that the knowledge we generate in the academia trickles down faster for those that otherwise need it. Thank you very much, Over.
Thank you very much, Ma. Please bear with us. It's unlike us to extend beyond our 1 hour plan, but please stay with us as we ask. If you are willing to stay, please stay. If you want to take your leave, you're free, so that our facilitator can, our presenter, sorry, can have time to ask more questions, because some persons are still raising their hand. Somebody is asking, or lots of persons are asking if they would have access to this slide. We would share this on YouTube. So I'm sure the link has been shared on the chat box. So please watch out for the link of the YouTube channel, subscribe and listen again and again and again. Thank you very much. So Jonathan, you have the floor. Ask your question or make your contribution.
Thank you so much. This was really an epic, brilliant presentation to the presenter. Thank you so much. I'm joining you from Namibia. I just have a quick one. I would like to know if the presenter try also to explore the culture and norms that we Africans we used to have, and also to have a look at mental health, because you realize that most of publications have observed that mental health, most of the time, ladies are the one are 2 times depressed than men, and this also can hinder their progress, even to engagement to the society, even for some activities. I just want to see, did she also explore those 2 areas and see how we can empower them, and then make them how we can come up with strategies, or we can see how we can go with a counseling to make them aware and to bounce back so that they can be also competitive to men. Thank you so much.
Jonathan, I think you've raised a brilliant issue, and I hope academia is also here can learn. I think one of the things I highlighted is that, look, I'm a trained dentist, but I'm using my skills to address research questions. Yes, women are worse affected than mental health. What does this mean for women in the academia? I'm not sure I have come across any publication or interventions that supports this. This is something I think is a critical topic to study, because it just might be contributing to the things we're seeing. More recently, I've started evolving my research into cultural issues and exploring cultural context of health interventions, and you'll see me writing a lot more about culture as well as dental service utilization. But yes, I don't think we disagree about the fact that there's a cultural context to what we're doing. Have we studied cultural context better with Africa? I think it's just evolving. We need to develop a critical mass of people who have competency to study, not just because they want to get promotion, but to study because they want to address societal issues. These are new frames of mind in the academia that needs to be nurtured, and we're still not nurturing it well. I want to celebrate Center for Gender Studies, who's using the technology and been able to promote this. If we have this kind of meetings every week for those that can come, you can continuously hear and learn about concepts that you should be exploring. I thank you, Jonathan. I agree with you. Those are two critical things that can influence what we're seeing. But I doubt if there's data to support what is likely to be a possibility. Opening up to people who are looking for a research topic to study. This is something to look at. Thank you, Jonathan, once again. Over to you, Professor Kundai. Professor Kundai, are you there? Or you might have dropped. Let me just look through the chat box.
I'm back. I don't know if,
okay.
Sorry. I don't know if I missed something.
No. I
Thank
just
you
handed
very
over to you.
much. Thank you very much, Ma. I think this is where we draw the line. I don't know if anyone wants to ask any question again, but we've taken 5 minutes more. So we would encourage us to watch out again for Center for Gender and Social Policy Studies or the Manuscript Writing Hub invitation to join another webinar, another training, another facilitation that would impact on us some learning and some skills. We at the Center for Gender and Social Policy Studies are beginning to think of equipping female staff and students with leadership skills. You note that Professor Morenike Okong recommended that we should build our capacity and look through at how we can be better leaders as female. So we want to look at some of the ways to equip ourselves and be better at taking on challenges in our space, in our academic space, so that we can have good representation of female staff, female colleagues in diverse leadership positions. So look out for some of our calls, some of our webinar links that would equip you. And I'm sure that because you learned one or two things today, you'll learn more as you join us. So thank you, Professor Morenike Okong. It's always a beautiful time to learn from you, always impactful, always engaging, and always challenging. You've always challenged us as younger colleagues to do well, to strive for excellence. And we promise you that we'll keep following you as we all do well together. Thank you, everyone, for joining. See you next time.
Yeah,
Bye.
I think, yes, just to note, Shella, I think you raised a very, very important issue about the impact of US and on diversity, equality, and inclusivity. I think the center is planning to address this very issue